At 25,000 feet above Nazi Germany, the sky was brutally quiet. The sun hung cold and far away, and every breath Jack Reynolds took through his oxygen mask burned with frost. His fingers were numb around the control stick. The metal around him creaked from the pressure difference, and ice crystals floated in the canopy like snowflakes in slow motion. Behind him, a twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110 closed in fast, its heavy frame gaining just enough speed to be dangerous. Jack yanked the stick back and climbed higher, thinner, deadlier. Most American fighters would have coughed, sputtered, and stalled at this height. The air was too thin. The engines overheated. The cooling systems couldn't keep up. But not this time. Jack's P-51 Mustang surged forward like it had just woken up. The Merlin engine under the hood purred instead of strained, pushing past 25,000 feet without a problem. Jack didn't understand why yet, but he felt it. This plane was different. It held together when every other one fell apart. The German pilot tried to follow. He pulled up after Jack. His aircraft wobbled, stuttered, then slipped out of the climb and fell away into the blue. Jack let out a half-laugh, half-breath, his heart pounding against the mask. This wasn't normal. This Mustang didn't fly like the others. It wasn't in the manual. The airplane looked the same. The engine had the same markings, but something somewhere had been changed. And what Jack didn't know, what no one in the skies could see, was that this edge, this advantage, had started far below. Not in a factory, not in an office, but in a freezing hangar in East Anglia, England, where one American mechanic had made a decision that went against orders, broke every rule, and may have saved Jack's life. This is the true story of how one man's unapproved fix transformed the most important fighter of World War II, and how a single act of rebellion helped America win the skies over Europe. The propaganda of perfection. Back in the year 1942, American military leadership was selling a dream. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just another fighter. It was the future. Sleek, fast, long-ranged, and married to the power of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it was hailed as the perfect answer to Nazi Germany's Luftwaffe. Official reports called it flawless. Training manuals praised its engineering. Public speeches were loaded with buzzwords like revolutionary and invincible. It was supposedly everything the American pilot needed to dominate the skies. But down on the ground inside the muddy, wind-blasted airfields of East Anglia, England, perfection was nowhere to be found. The Mustang looked good on paper. It flew well in warm weather at low altitude and under controlled test conditions. But in real combat at 20,000 feet and higher in freezing cold air under full throttle pressure, pilots and mechanics started to notice the truth. The aircraft had a hidden weakness. The cooling system in particular became a serious problem. The belly-mounted scoop under the fuselage was supposed to solve everything. It was designed to pull in high-pressure air to cool the radiator, allowing the engine to run at full power longer. Engineers had even flirted with the idea of using the airflow to create thrust, a theoretical idea known as the Meredith effect. But in practice, that system was finicky. If airflow wasn't perfect, temperatures skyrocketed. Pilots began reporting engine overheating during climbs. In the middle of dogfights, their gauges would spike red, warning them to throttle back or risk burning out entirely. In winter, the coolant sometimes froze in the lines before the engine could even warm up. And if any part of the pressurized cooling loop leaked, it didn't take long for the engine to seize or burst into flames. But the official position from command was simple. Do not modify the aircraft. Do not question the design. Follow procedure. That answer didn't sit right with a 33-year-old staff sergeant from Tulsa. Oklahoma named Melvin Harper. Everyone on base called him Tex. He was a lanky, soft-spoken mechanic with hands like steel vises and a mind that never stopped tinkering. Before the war, he'd spent his weekends tuning flathead Fords and drag racing friends down old farm roads. He didn't care much for rules, but he knew machinery intimately. Tex had been assigned to a fighter group stationed at a former Royal Air Force field outside Cambridge. Cold winds tore through the open hangars. The concrete froze every night. He and his crew worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer, keeping Mustangs running through frost, wind, and mud. But over time, something started to bother him. It was the sound, that hollow metallic groan the engine made when climbing fast at high altitude. Tex didn't like it. Then came the complaints. Engine temps too high. Coolant systems needing constant repairs. More than one Mustang came back scorched under the cowling, or didn't come back at all. He read every manual, cross-checked every spec. And then one night in December, after yet another overheated P-51 limped back from patrol, Tex crouched under the fuselage with a flashlight, staring at the belly scoop. He started asking questions no one else dared ask. What if the scoop's angle was wrong? What if the airflow didn't compress the way the designers thought it would? And what if by reshaping just the inside of the duct, he could make the radiator work better, cooler, cleaner, more efficiently? Officially, he was supposed to log the issue and wait for engineering updates from stateside. But Tex had lost 2 friends that week. He wasn't about to wait, so he made a decision. The next morning, armed with scrap aluminum, a welding torch, and a mechanic's instinct sharpened by years of racing engines under pressure, Tex Harper broke the rules. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't file a report. He just got to work. And in doing so, he triggered a quiet revolution. One that started not with a general's command, but with a greased idea in a cold English hangar. The unapproved hack. Tex Harper didn't just see a problem. He felt it in his gut. In the temperature charts, in the way the engine sounded when it strained in the upper atmosphere. He knew the standard system wasn't doing its job, so instead of writing another complaint or waiting for orders, he rolled up his sleeves and went after the problem with the only tools he trusted: a hacksaw, a rivet gun, and a lifetime of machine sense. He started by removing the lower access panel beneath the belly scoop on one P-51. Inside was the radiator duct, the air intake system meant to cool the engine by channeling outside airflow through the radiator and then out the rear, creating a pressurized tunnel effect. It looked fine on the surface, but Tex believed the internal shape was wrong for actual high-speed, high-altitude flight. In theory, if the airflow was compressed properly, it wouldn't just cool the engine. It could generate a small amount of jet-like thrust. That was the Meredith effect, something engineers at Rolls-Royce had once theorized about, but never fully put into action in a combat aircraft. Tex hadn't read any white papers. He didn't need to. He understood how airflow behaved at speed from his years around drag races and custom ducts. What he saw inside that scoop made him shake his head. Sharp corners, misaligned joints, and no smoothing to guide high-pressure air where it needed to go. The duct acted more like a brake than a boost. So he made his move. Using thin sheets of polished aluminum from a damaged wing panel, he cut and shaped a series of internal vanes, angled plates that gently narrowed the airflow passage, forcing the incoming air to compress before it reached the radiator. He smoothed the edges, riveted them in place, and added a makeshift seal around the access hatch to reduce turbulence. He didn't tell his commanding officer. He didn't log the modification. He didn't even mention it to the pilot scheduled to fly the aircraft the next morning, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds. Jack was one of the younger pilots in the squadron, brave, sharp, and just cocky enough to push a Mustang to its limits. When he climbed into that plane the next day, he didn't know anything had changed. But 30 minutes into his high-altitude patrol, he radioed back with a strange report. Birds climbing smoother than ever, temps holding steady. Is this a new engine? Tex didn't answer. He just smiled. By the end of that first flight, the results were obvious. Engine temperature at 25,000 feet, down by 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Acceleration in climb noticeably improved. Jack said the plane felt tighter, more alive. He didn't know why, but he liked it. Tex didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, he applied his mod to 6 more Mustangs. Each one got a custom-fitted duct system, tweaked slightly, based on what he learned from the last. He refined the angles, reduced drag, and tested different sealing methods using parachute cloth and adhesive resin. The impact was undeniable. Planes that received the Tex mod climbed faster, stayed cooler, and returned from missions with fewer mechanical issues. Pilots began requesting the hot ones, Tex's planes. They started calling the tweaks Harper's hacks. Unofficially, the squadron commander gave him the green light. Officially, nothing had happened. There was no paperwork, no authorization, just results. Other maintenance crews noticed. Tex started getting quiet questions from neighboring squadrons. Hey, mind showing us what you're doing with your scoops? Mechanics began sneaking into his hangar at night to measure duct angles and sketch the design on cigarette packs. The mod spread like wildfire, and no one dared report it. After all, the pilots flying these machines had a simple motto: Anything that brought them home alive was worth keeping quiet. Tex knew he was walking a fine line. He wasn't just altering military hardware. He was doing it during wartime without approval. If someone in command found out, he could be demoted, court-martialed, or worse. But then again, it wasn't about rules for him. It was about survival. The turning point came in mid-February. One of the base's best pilots, Captain Roy Red Lansing, flew a mission deep into occupied France in one of Tex's modified Mustangs. During the flight, Red was ambushed by 3 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters. He fought them off for 10 full minutes, outclimbed one, outran another, and managed to limp home with engine temps running stable the entire time. After landing, Red walked straight into the hangar, looked Tex in the eye and said, "You saved my life up there. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Word reached higher up the chain within days, not through formal channels, but through whispers, combat reports, and pilot debriefs. Suddenly, senior officers started asking questions. Why are your planes lasting longer? Why are your engines running cooler than spec? Why are pilots requesting the same 6 tail numbers every mission? Tex knew it was only a matter of time before someone came down to investigate, but by then, his little rebellion had become a quiet revolution. The Mustang evolves. What began as an unsanctioned tweak to a single Mustang had now taken on a life of its own. Within weeks, Tex Harper's cooling modification wasn't just a rumor. It was a movement. Across the base, other mechanics started replicating his work, adjusting their own radiator ducts, comparing airflow results, and swapping stories over lukewarm coffee in drafty hangars. But it wasn't just talk. The numbers began to show something hard and undeniable. First, the engine temperatures. Pilots flying modified P-51s reported a consistent drop in high-altitude engine temperature, 15 to 17 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than standard configurations. This might not sound dramatic on paper, but in the thin air above 25,000 feet, that margin was the difference between pushing your aircraft to its limits or throttling back to avoid an engine fire. Second, time to climb. With better airflow and reduced drag through the radiator duct, the Mustangs reached combat altitude faster, up to 12% faster, depending on loadout and weather. That meant pilots could get above their German adversaries more quickly, giving them the holy grail of air combat, the altitude advantage. Third, and perhaps most important of all, was survivability. In one squadron alone, the kill-to-loss ratio for Tex-modified aircraft jumped to more than 3.1 over a period of 6 weeks. The pilots flying them weren't different. The guns hadn't changed. The fuel was the same. The only difference was a reshaped airflow duct, and the man who dared to cut it open. Soon, word spread beyond Tex's original unit. Mechanics at neighboring airfields across East Anglia started writing letters home asking for thin aluminum sheets, smoother tools, even homemade sealants to mimic the improvements. Some even pulled parts off grounded aircraft just to copy the internal veins. Unofficial blueprints began circulating on napkins, notepads, and even pages torn from aircraft maintenance logs. There was no central design. Each mechanic brought their own flair to the concept, but they all owed the spark to Tex Harper and his original rule-breaking experiment. Still, the top brass hadn't formally acknowledged anything. Commanders higher up were aware something was happening. But with kill ratios improving and mission success rates climbing, no one was eager to dig too deep. As long as the planes kept flying and the pilots kept coming home, any potential violations were quietly ignored. That is until a visiting colonel from the 8th Air Force Command stopped by the base for an inspection. He was doing a routine walkthrough of maintenance operations when he spotted the belly scoop on one P-51. It had been opened up for a coolant line check, and inside he noticed the non-standard ductwork, angled metal veins, polished smooth, clearly not part of any authorized blueprint. His face turned red. Within minutes, he was demanding answers. Who authorized this modification? Where were the engineering documents? Why hadn't North American Aviation, the aircraft's manufacturer, been consulted? Tex was called in. He didn't lie. He explained simply and clearly what he had changed and why. He showed temperature logs, climb rate comparisons, and combat reports. Other mechanics backed him up. Pilots, some of them seasoned aces, lined up to speak on his behalf. One of them was Captain Red Lansing. Standing in front of the colonel, he delivered one sentence that cut through the noise. "Sir, you can fly it cold or die hot." That's the choice. The colonel didn't reply, not directly, but he made a call that evening. 2 days later, engineers from North American Aviation arrived on base carrying blueprints, testing equipment, and a list of questions. They spent a week examining Tex's modifications. They ran airflow tests, took detailed photographs, and even installed pressure sensors inside one of the modified ducts. And when the data came back, the verdict was clear. Tex Harper's design didn't just work, it was brilliant. The internal vanes helped stabilize airflow, reduce turbulence, and increase the pressure across the radiator core. That improved heat dissipation and allowed the Meredith effect to kick in under combat conditions, delivering a small but measurable thrust gain, exactly what the original designers had hoped for, but failed to achieve under lab conditions. In short, Tex had done in a freezing hangar what a team of engineers hadn't been able to pull off in 2 years of development. The recommendation came swiftly. North American began reviewing the changes for incorporation into the next production batch of P-51s, the D variant, which would become the most famous model of the war. As for Tex, he wasn't reprimanded. He was promoted to technical sergeant and later given a field commendation for innovation under combat conditions. But Tex didn't care about rank. What mattered to him were the pilots. The fact that more of them were coming back now because of something he built with scrap metal and instinct, that was enough. And the pilots, they knew who to thank. One of them carved it into the access panel of his Mustang with a pocket knife. For Tex, who made her breathe. When brass found out by the spring of 1944, Tex Harper's once secret duct modification was an open secret across East Anglia. Dozens of P-51 Mustangs now carried the internal vane system. Pilots were flying higher, fighting longer, and returning with fewer overheating problems. But that kind of success doesn't stay in the shadows for long. When the visiting colonel from the 8th Air Force Command spotted the unauthorized ductwork during his inspection, his reaction was swift and furious. Military aircraft weren't supposed to be modified in the field, especially not structural components like a cooling system. The rules were there for a reason, to ensure consistency, safety, and accountability. Within hours, a stop work order was issued. All aircraft with modified cooling ducts were to be grounded for review. No further changes were to be made without written engineering approval. To Tex, it was more than a slap in the face. It was a potential death sentence for the pilots. One aircraft had already been prepped for a long-range escort mission to Berlin. The pilot, Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, was scheduled to fly it the next morning. When he was told his aircraft was grounded, he stormed into the maintenance tent. "You're telling me I have to fly a stock bird?" he asked. "Orders from upstairs," someone muttered. Jack looked at Tex. "Tell me this is a mistake." Tex didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, a quiet tension settled over the hangars. Mechanics whispered about what might happen next. Some feared Tex would be court-martialed. Others assumed the whole squadron would be punished. But then something unexpected happened. The pilots pushed back. It started with Captain Red Lansing. He walked into the command office, still in flight gear, and made his case directly to the squadron leader. He didn't raise his voice. He just told the truth. "Sir, I don't care what's written in the tech manual. Those modified planes keep us alive. You put me in a stock model, and I'm a sitting duck above 20,000 feet. More pilots followed. In ones and twos, they gave quiet but firm testimonies. They weren't engineers. They didn't understand airflow ratios or radiator efficiency, but they knew results. And the results said Tex's design worked. The squadron leader, under growing pressure, sent a formal request to delay the grounding until the aircraft could be evaluated properly. The brass reluctantly agreed, but only if North American Aviation could send their engineers to inspect the modifications firsthand. So they did. Within days, 2 senior engineers arrived at the base, men in wool coats and horn-rimmed glasses, clearly unused to the mud, noise, and urgency of a frontline airfield. They examined Tex's modified Mustangs carefully, taking measurements, asking questions, and comparing them with factory specifications. At first, they said very little, but once they ran wind tunnel simulations and pressure tests using their field instruments, the silence broke. "This is effective," one of them finally admitted. "Very effective." They confirmed what Tex and the pilots had been saying for weeks. His reshaped duct created smoother airflow, higher internal pressure, and better heat dissipation. It wasn't a fluke. It was sound engineering, even if it hadn't come from a drafting table. The engineers didn't stop at approval. They took detailed notes and sent them back to California, where North American began adapting the concept for future production models. And just like that, the confrontation ended not in punishment but in progress. Tex was called into the squadron office. The same colonel who'd once threatened to ground the planes handed him a typed letter. It was a commendation for field innovation. It came with a promotion and, more importantly, official recognition that his modification had saved lives. Tex didn't say much. He just nodded, tucked the letter into his breast pocket, and went back to the hangar because there were still more planes to fix and more pilots to protect. From rogue fix to official doctrine. By late March of 1944, what had started as one man's quiet act of defiance had now been legitimized. North American aviation engineers didn't just validate Tex Harper's design, they embraced it. Back at their facilities in California, they began drafting formal revisions for the P-51's radiator duct system. The technical name for it would appear in memos and blueprints as an internal airflow smoothing and compression retrofit. But among the pilots and mechanics who lived through the change, it had only one name, Tex's Fix. And with the upcoming release of the P-51D variant, the most famous and widely used version of the Mustang, his ideas became permanent. New Mustangs rolled off the production lines with optimized duct shapes, smoother flow paths, and subtle design tweaks inspired by Tex's scrap metal prototype. What the engineers in suits had once theorized, a mechanic in coveralls had proven in war. This was the twist no one expected. A mechanic with no formal degree, no engineering title, and no clearance to innovate, had not only solved a high-altitude performance issue, he had helped reshape the most effective fighter aircraft of the Second World War. The Mustang's ability to escort bombers deep into Germany without overheating, to climb higher and faster than nearly any other propeller-driven plane in the war, and to survive grueling dogfights above the clouds. All of it had been enhanced by a change that wasn't even supposed to exist. Pilots noticed the shift immediately. The new Mustangs felt tighter, cleaner in the climb, more responsive in high-altitude turns. Engine temperatures remained stable, even under extended boost. In combat, that meant fewer aborted missions, fewer emergency landings, and a greater margin for survival. By the time the Normandy invasion approached in June of 1944, Mustang squadrons across England were flying almost exclusively with aircraft that included the revised cooling design. The fix that had been grounded was now gospel. Tex never bragged about any of this. He didn't give interviews. He didn't write reports. His name never appeared on the blueprints. But among the crews he became a quiet legend. Not because he wanted fame, but because he had done what needed to be done, and he did it right. There's a story told by one of the younger mechanics who worked under Tex in those months. He said that after the first P-51D arrived on base with the new duct already factory installed, Tex walked around it once, crouched down, ran his hand along the inner curve of the scoop, and nodded. Then he said only 2 words. They got it. For Tex, that was enough. It wasn't about getting credit. It was about seeing that the idea, born of necessity, instinct, and a little rule-breaking, had finally found its rightful place in the war effort. And for the pilots, the message was even simpler. They didn't care where the fix came from. They just knew their Mustangs ran cooler, flew better, and brought them home more often than before. That twist from rogue fix to official doctrine was a rare moment in military history, a reminder that sometimes the front lines of innovation aren't found in boardrooms or labs, but in frozen hangars under leaking engines, in the hands of men who trust what they feel more than what they're told. The battle over Berlin. March 6, 1944. The U.S. 8th Air Force launched its boldest daylight bombing mission yet, Berlin. It was the heart of the Reich, the center of Nazi power, industry, and propaganda. The Germans had prepared for this. They knew it was coming, and they were ready to throw everything they had into the sky to stop it. Hundreds of American B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators took off from bases across England. Their target, the industrial and military facilities ringing the German capital. their protection, squadrons of P-51 Mustangs flying high and fast as fighter escort. For weeks leading up to this moment, Tex Harper's modified Mustangs and now their factory-born successors had been showing their worth. But no test was greater than the airspace above Berlin. It was the most heavily defended air corridor in Europe. The Luftwaffe had stationed their best squadrons along the route, experienced pilots, aggressive tactics and swarms of fighters, primarily Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The early hours of the mission were eerily quiet. The bombers droned eastward in tight formation, silhouetted against a cold blue sky. But just west of the German capital, the Luftwaffe struck. German radar picked up the American force, and fighters scrambled in waves. The plan was simple: hit the bombers hard and fast before they could reach Berlin, and do it above 25,000 feet, where the cold would test engines and test nerves. But this time, the Mustangs didn't fall behind. They didn't lag, didn't overheat, didn't break formation. They stayed up, and they hit back. In the chaos that followed, dozens of dogfights broke out across the sky. Mustang pilots dove and climbed, with precision, executing tight turns and slashing attacks that tore into German formations. They no longer had to worry about managing engine temps during combat. They could stay in the fight longer, and with that came a newfound aggressiveness. Captain Red Lansing, flying one of Tex's early field-modified Mustangs, reportedly scored 3 kills that day. 1 Messerschmitt and 2 Focke-Wulfs taken down in a 10-minute stretch near Potsdam. In a debriefing later, he said, "The engine didn't even flinch. I was climbing at 30,000 feet and still had power left. They tried to outclimb me and they couldn't." Other pilots reported the same. One group credited the cooling system improvements for allowing extended high-power climbs that would have been impossible just months earlier. No overheating, no boil-off, just raw, reliable power. By mission's end, 69 German aircraft had been confirmed destroyed. Many more were damaged. The Luftwaffe had been dealt a blow it wouldn't recover from quickly, and most stunning of all, nearly every American bomber made it home. The Berlin raid didn't just strike fear into the heart of the Reich. It proved that the US now had air superiority, even over the most defended city in Europe. And while the headlines back home praised the courage of the pilots and the precision of the bombers, few knew what had really made that mission possible. It wasn't just the Merlin engine or the fuel tanks or the combat training. It was airflow. It was cooling. It was the ability to fight at 30,000 feet without your machine turning against you. And for that, the credit went to a man who didn't fly. A man who worked in the cold with grease on his hands and no official rank in the story. Tex Harper. That day over Berlin marked a turning point. Not just in the war, but in how air combat was fought. It was no longer enough to have speed or firepower. You needed reliability, you needed altitude, you needed the edge. And because of Tex, the P-51 Mustang had it. What Tex left behind. After Berlin, the air war changed. The Mustang, already respected, became feared. German pilots began to recognize the silhouette instantly and dread it. The P-51 was no longer just a fast escort. It was a predator, a high-altitude killer, a plane that could fly farther, climb faster, and fight longer than anything the Luftwaffe could throw at it. And the secret to that leap wasn't some high-level strategy session or factory breakthrough. It was a mechanic with a hacksaw and a cold hangar who refused to accept good enough. Tex Harper never appeared in the headlines. He never gave interviews, never claimed credit. After the war, he went back to Oklahoma and opened a small engine repair shop. Most of his customers never knew he had once shaped the sky over Europe. But his legacy didn't end in 1945. The principles behind his cooling mod, the practical application of the Meredith effect, became standard practice in post-war aircraft design. Engineers studying jet propulsion borrowed lessons from Tex's battlefield ductwork. The idea that cooling systems could contribute to thrust, not just manage heat, carried forward into the jet age. In the Korean War, American jets like the F-86 Sabre benefited from refined airflow engineering that traced its roots in part to what Tex proved in the field. Even modern stealth fighters with their carefully managed heat signatures and internal ducting owe a technical debt to what happened under the fuselage of a P-51 Mustang in 1944. But maybe the most enduring legacy wasn't found in blueprints or museum plaques. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, there's a restored P-51 Mustang painted in the colors of the 8th Air Force. It's a beautiful machine. Shining aluminum skin, invasion stripes on the wings. The name Lucky Lady stenciled beneath the cockpit. And if you crouch down, way down, and look beneath the belly just inside the edge of the radiator scoop, you'll see something most visitors miss. 3 words etched in small, careful letters for techs who made her breathe. No ceremony, no statue, just a quiet acknowledgement from one generation of warriors to the man who helped them survive. And that's the kind of legacy that outlives medals. They say history is written by the victors, but sometimes the most important parts are written in grease, not ink, in silence, not speeches. Tex Harper never fired a gun in combat. He never pulled G's in a dogfight or bailed out of a burning cockpit. But without him, a whole generation of pilots might not have come home. He broke the rules. He ignored procedure. And in doing so, he saved lives. Not through force, but through focus. Not through orders, but through understanding. He saw a problem, and instead of waiting, he fixed it. That's not just engineering. That's courage. Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, the pilot we met at the beginning of this story, once gave an interview years after the war. He was older then, white hair, a quiet voice. But when he was asked who his hero was, he didn't name a general or another pilot. He said this: "People talk about aces, but the man who saved my life wore oil-stained coveralls and never left the ground. I don't even know if I ever saw his face, but I remember how that engine held together when I needed it most. He gave me altitude, and that gave me a chance to come home." There are thousands of stories like that from the war. Stories that were never told or were nearly forgotten. Stories that remind us that victory isn't just about firepower or bravery in the sky. It's also about people like Tex, the ones who work quietly, who solve problems, who build things better, not because they're told to, but because it's right. Not all heroes fly. Some of them kneel under a Mustang in the dead of night, shaping aluminum with frozen hands, thinking about the pilot who will sit behind that engine tomorrow. And thanks to Tex Harper, that pilot had a better chance of coming home.